Okay. All right. So I feel like it's very easy after this emotional overdose to feel either paralyzed or by the fact that Aleppo was such a culmination, military culmination, political culmination, to feel that it's like all over and that the most that we can do is just to bear witness, listen, and then to just leave, go back home and feel that there's nothing much that we could still do. And I just want to leave you, since this is the last intervention in this event, that there is something that you could still do. The first and foremost is that you need to maintain the narrative. The minute you leave here, a lot of people will come to you with like counter arguments. The first thing they will tell you, the people who were in East Aleppo were all terrorists. They were the same people who were in Raqqa and Mosul. They're all Islamic State. They're all people hell-bent on extermination. They're all Salafists. And here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who lived in Aleppo, who are from Aleppo, who are not Salafists, who are not terrorists, and who are telling you the people who were in East Aleppo were the people of East Aleppo. And some of them were armed, they were armed groups, and some of these armed groups, obviously like armed groups, they were expected to, keep authority, maintain order. Sometimes they used weapons against other parts of the country, and so they're not by any stretch angels, but at the same time they also were in charge of a certain area that, unlike the parts under the regime control, where it was an area where there were activists, where doctors, where NGOs, where journalists who were working freely and who believed that the country where they lived, this part of Aleppo where they thrived, was a microcosm of the future Syria, that it was free, that they lived without fear, that they could actually do something. And so a lot of people in Norway, in Europe, all over the world, on the right and on the left, unfortunately, will tell you that East Aleppo was only controlled by terrorists. Tell them that after you witnessed those 2 days, this is wrong. Okay? So this is the first thing that you need to, and also tell them that the battalions, even the armed groups, who I just said were by no means angels, they were the first people to fight ISIS in the beginning of 2014, way before Russia and way before the regime. The battalions of East Aleppo were the first groups of the moderate opposition to actually expel ISIS from their own city in the early months of 2014. So also keep that in mind, because the narrative needs to be protected. Okay? The third point that I want to make is that now, and of course Aleppo was a huge turning point, and of course we all feel broken, and a lot of us couldn't write anymore, and a lot of us were depressed for months and months to come. But we would be fooled, and we would be falling into the trap of the regime to believe that it's actually all over. It's not all over. There are still hundreds of thousands of people living outside regime-controlled areas. And the regime wants you all to believe that the war has been won, that it's all over, that there's nothing we can do. Khalas, the regime is winning, so what can we do? No, I mean, it's actually still happening. Most of Ghouta is still not part of the regime control. The southern parts of Syria are still not under regime control. All of Idlib is not under regime control. And again, the regime, Russia and Iran will want you to believe that all of these areas are just a bunch of terrorists. Suddenly hundreds of thousands of Syrians are all terrorists. They're not terrorists. And you can exert pressure on your own governments so that Russia, Iran, and the Syrian regime cannot replicate what they did in Aleppo. They cannot just keep bombing and bombing and bombing and killing tens of thousands of people until the people say, well, okay, whatever, just put me in a green bus and expel me. I'm from this village, I'm from this city, but expel me to Turkey or put me somewhere else in Syria just so that my family and my neighbors can be spared. This is still ongoing. It's not actually over, okay? And now the third thing is that this actually has a certain political cachet. It's not just about humanitarian sympathy, it's not just about people dying, it's also about a political process which is still ongoing. Russia and Iran and the Syrian regime want you to think that because it's winning the war, that basically Assad can stay in power. And the EU and the United States of America, they have no policy to counter this. They're completely in paralysis mode. They're frozen. They don't know what to do about this. And the Syrian opposition, despite its many problems, despite its many divisions, they actually all came together. The civilian factions, the military factions, they established one big united body called the High Commission for Negotiations. And they said, we are willing to sit on the negotiation table and to negotiate with the Syrian regime and to even form a transitional government that combines parts of the opposition and parts of the regime, provided that Assad, his family, and people who are guilty of war crimes cannot actually stay in power. The opposition is being pragmatic. The opposition is saying we can actually form a transitional government with elements of this regime. We don't want to actually throw the country to the Salafists, to the terrorists, to ISIS. But the Russians, the Iranians, they don't even accept this bare minimum. They want to basically make millions of Syrians, people like me. I lost my entire house. It was looted by regime thugs. People lost their relatives, their families, their entire... I don't know if I will ever be able to go to Aleppo if the regime is in power. And yet, the Russians and the regime and the Iranians want you to all be convinced that the best thing that we can get is to allow Bashar al-Assad to stay in power. After 7 years of destruction, after all these war crimes, this is unparalleled. The one example that I can think of is how Franco, after 7 years, was allowed to stay in power for 30 or 40 years after. And, imagine that. So, and the EU in particular has something to play, because the Russians, they don't have the money to rebuild Syria. The Iranians, they don't want to pay the bill of reconstruction for Syria. The regime is completely bankrupt, had it not been for Iranian support. They want to actually provide, they want the EU to cash this money for reconstruction, while Assad, a war criminal, a war thug, who's going to actually take most of this money and put it in his own pocket, they want the EU to do this. And so the least you can do is to pressure your own government, to pressure the European Union not to give legitimacy, political sanction, and economic support to this political settlement that the Russians, the Iranians, and the Syrian regime is cooking. So this is the only thing that I want to say. Thank you.